let's start with something that's a little bit unsavory, shall we? So, it's a little bit of a mishmash. We obviously can't say for sure who's telling the truth, who's not. This is obviously, of course, for legal purposes, allegedly. However, AEW has been caught in a suggested bullying slash gaslighting issue. This was raised by former AEW video editor Louis Benson, who wrote a lengthy statement on Twitter about his time working for the company. For you guys who are listening or are watching who are already aware of the full statement, and don't worry, I am going to discuss, of course, his previous tweets as well, because we just cover everything here. But we felt that, for full disclosure, we'd read out the whole thing. But if you have already heard it, basically fast forward 2 minutes, because I know Mr. Wilkinson here is not completely up to speed on this. So this is what this guy tweeted. Things were very off from the time I started with AEW by way of Comeback Studios. That's quite important because he doesn't work directly for AEW. It's essentially, from what I'm getting, he was working for a company that was outsourced for AEW. Shortly after I was hired, I was told that Cody, the EVP, as we all know, didn't like me and thought I was a Stalker fan based on an interaction I had with him at All In. This didn't make sense to me because every other time I'd met him, he seemed friendly, even initiating physical contact with me. But I was told over and over again, if Cody asks, we'll fire you. I became terrified of the man because I had left home and moved 8 hours away from friends and family for this job. And I was told my job was in the hands of a guy who already didn't like me. Cody apparently requested that I not be present when he was in our building, which led to me either being made to leave or stuck hidden in a room when he came around, having to ask if I could come out to use the restroom. I was also
Jesus
told...
Christ.
I was also told not to talk to any talent, not even friends I'd made before either of us worked there. This led to really awkward interactions early on when I tried to avoid making eye contact with people I'd had friendly interactions with before, or not responding when someone would attempt to talk to me. I didn't receive credit for work I'd done in a Road to Series because Cody only wants, this is in quotations, Cody only wants these two people to have credit. When I brought up that other people had credits, I was told the only reason we credited everyone else was because they were being babies about it. I wasn't allowed to post on social media about my job. I couldn't even update my LinkedIn. I was the only employee this applied to, as my co-workers would advertise weekly that they worked for AEW or would post pictures on set or with members of the roster. After being told for months that Cody didn't want to even be in the same building as me, he showed up randomly on a weekend while I was working, and I literally came face to face with him. He greeted me like nothing was wrong and gave me an aggressive high five after complimenting my all-in shirt. I barely squeaked out the word hi as I walked past him to my office, where I sat at my desk hyperventilated because I was terrified that I was going to lose my job because I just so happened to be in the building at the same time. I had finally received a credit in the first Countdown special as a production assistant, which they were hesitant to give me, but I had finally received recognition, was tagged in a Facebook post by my boss, and had multiple people tagging me to ask if it was my name they saw. I put out a single post thanking people for their support and hoping to make them proud. Throughout the next week, I find out that Cody allegedly screenshotted my tweet and sent it to my boss with a thumbs down emoji. I'm told that I have to delete all my social media or be fired. In the meeting, I asked my direct boss if he had read the tweet, not in a snarky or hateful way. The response was my other boss shouting, "Don't fucking talk to him like that," at me. This led to my 6'5" Hall of Famer boss getting my face, intimidating me into deleting my social media in front of him, saying, "Do it now." And he knew I would do it because I wanted the job. And he would remind me constantly that AEW doesn't want you. You would never be hired without me, or that this person or that person doesn't like you, so we can't let you be seen by them. Whew, it does go on a while, so bear with us, ladies and gentlemen. I went without Twitter for months and had friends attempting to find me to see if I was okay because I had disappeared. During this time, I was mocked by my bosses because I pointed out that forcing me to delete social media was illegal, that I wasn't sure if I wanted to work there anymore, or even saying they should make me start over from zero on Twitter. I'm not sure Cody was even aware that I had edited anything for this company. Apparently, QT Marshall had suggested I edit something when the normal editors were all busy, and he said, "Really? You're suggesting Louis to me?" Even though I had edited a few packages he was in and several episodes of his wife's cooking show, which I believe is his YouTube show. Whatever that might be called. A Shot of Brandy, I think it's called. Sidebar about QT. He was always very kind to me, and there were plenty of times I felt like he was my only ally in the whole organization. I have nothing but good things to say about QT Marshall. It's nice, I suppose. Finally, in February, Cody made positive remarks to my face, saying that I'd gone through hell and pushed through, and I was the man now, going as far as to say, I like Louis now. It was nice, but out of nowhere, because I'd only had about 45 seconds worth of interaction with him over the past 8 months. I don't know if this was an attempt to apologize for how I was treated. Heck, I don't know if he knows how I was treated. He never actually said he was sorry, but I at least felt like I had a monkey off my back. Things got weird when COVID reared its head. Work slowed down. My main job had been working on web shows, Dark, Control Center, etc. I would sit behind the camera and follow the script with a talent, sometimes advising on pronunciations or deliveries. In other projects I've worked on, this is called a producer. I even had talent calling me as such. Tony Schiavone, somebody I greatly admire, gave me one of the greatest compliments I've ever received. You're full of shit, but you're a hell of a producer. But I was warned that I shouldn't refer to myself as producing or being a producer because my boss hadn't said that I was a producer. It didn't matter that I was doing the work or that said boss wasn't in the room for 80% of the shoots because he hadn't decreed it. It wasn't so. They stopped shooting Control Center and Top 5 in our studio due to the pandemic, so a lot of my work was eliminated. I was relegated to pretty much no AEW work, just videos that probably needed to be done. So do them and we might put them out eventually. The last thing I edited to completion were the librarian sketches. Admittedly, I was demoralized and my work suffered from it, sending out edits that I was embarrassed by. I wanted to see if I could contribute in other ways, so I tried to accompany a shooter on what I thought was a minor shoot, shooting footage of a debuting talent training, and was denied because they didn't know if it was what the boss wanted. The boss accused me of just wanting to be seen, in quotations. For some reason, anytime I wanted to do anything, they accused me of having some ulterior motive. When I put out my thank you tweet, they said I just wanted people to know that I work for AEW, which again is laughable because the lead editor posted, and still posts, by the way, regularly about how they work for AEW or edited this or that, but one where I tried to show humility was seen as bragging. But I digress. Yes, you do. It started coming to a head for me around this time. My girlfriend and I had to move out of our apartment, and it was our new apartment on a specific date. It was bad timing. We were working from home at the time, so I requested 3 days off in total to move, a day to pack our stuff, moving day, and a day to unpack. These were the first days I had asked off all year, except for the day before Thanksgiving to drive home. When the days off were approved, it was in an email that was done in a very shamey way, saying that my days off were mine to use as I please, but I should only need 1 day off to move, and I was just being lazy by taking 3 days off, and I should have chosen a weekend. I didn't have this option. When we returned to the office, they didn't tell me that the person I shared an office had stayed home because he thought he had COVID. He eventually tested positive. That night, my girlfriend had also been informed that her supervisor had COVID and she was having symptoms. So she had a doctor's appointment and they said we should both quarantine for 10 days and get tested. I requested 7 days off from work to quarantine and texted, I can work from home, I don't care. They never sent any work, but a co-worker did check up on us intermittently. The day I returned from quarantine, they sent me home immediately, telling me to take another COVID test. And when I got home, they asked me to do a meeting, which was between me, my boss, and 2 co-workers. For some reason, for them to tell me that I didn't offer hard enough to work from home during quarantine. See, I offered because I said, I'll work from home. I don't care. It meant that I actually didn't care, and that by staying home on doctor's orders, I was just not wanting to work. And I didn't have to quarantine for 10 days because it wasn't my doctor who gave the order. Oh, and the coworker who called me was just trying to get me to offer to work from home again. The first time I offered wasn't good enough, I guess. It does go on extremely lengthy. Yeah, there seems to be a lot of things going on here. Unfortunately, after his incredibly long diatribe was released, a lot of people dug through his old tweets, the majority of which were from around the 2012 region. There were a couple of tweets that suggested that he was quite excited about the idea of Cody's sausage, and there was also an extremely offensive tweet where he used a homophobic slur beginning with F, which is obvious, and also he used the N-word with a hard ER on the end as well in reference to Paris Hilton, which has led to a lot of AEW fans using that as an opportunity to debunk his story. It's a very difficult premise. It's also a very difficult subject to kind of delve into, but what are your thoughts on this? Like, because from my perspective, even if he has tweeted some awful things in the past, that for me isn't enough to completely debunk a story like this. And also, this story is incredibly lengthy and incredibly detailed. It's something that you can read. Unfortunately, he has recently privatized his Twitter account. We're not here to say whether he's a nice guy or not. Obviously, somebody uses the N word in that kind of fashion, I don't have a great deal of respect for personally. That being said, just because he's let out some bad tweets doesn't necessarily mean that this didn't happen. And I'm frankly a little bit alarmed by the reaction from AEW fans who claim themselves to be very all inclusive and very understanding, in comparison to other companies. Can you make, sense, of this
Um,
situation?
it's difficult because a story that intricate with so many details, unless you're some sort of like master manipulator, like some fucking evil genius, the amount of detail he goes into, the amount of just the length of it in general, that kind of stuff is very difficult to make up on the fly.
Yeah.
Like that's the stuff you'd need to sit down, pen and paper, and go, yeah, this happened, this happened. Oh, let's not forget this. Ooh, this sounds great. It sounds too awful to not be true. And wrestling, we're all aware, this business has had so many instances of hazing or like bullshit like that. Like we just have to look at JBL. That guy has done unspeakably terrible things to people. Like it 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 was acceptable back then, I guess. In the '90s, people were a lot harder now, but you can't do that anymore. It's not right. And sure, like this guy might have some tweets from back in the day, but what did you say, 2011, 2012? That's almost 10 years ago now. I'm not the same
Yeah.
person I was in 2011. God, no. For better or for worse, that's not really up to me, I suppose. But it's definitely like night and day difference. So people get caught saying bad things on Twitter all the time from back in the day. The biggest example I could think of, because it's also wrestling related, is James Gunn said apparently had some terrible tweets back in the day, and he got removed from Guardians of the Galaxy 3 as the director. They have since brought him back because the entire cast and crew, including Batista, and who wants to get that guy angry, fought for him and said, "We're not going to do it unless you bring him back." He's not who he was then. And that's the biggest thing we need to take away here. Even if he was kind of creeping on Cody a bit, which is, I mean, have you seen Cody Rhodes? He's an attractive guy. It's a little weird, but, fine. He's probably not like that now. And for him to get discredited, for him to just be told, go hide in the broom closet while Cody's here, that's not fair. That's not right. It definitely puts a darker light on Cody Rhodes, who has, for all intents and purposes, until now, seemed to have been just an outstanding guy, a fantastic person. And that's, I don't want to believe that. But at the same time, just again, with how much details in the story, it's hard not to.
What disappoints me about the whole scenario is that he may well be embellishing. He may well be lying for all I know. I don't know that. I don't. And the problem with social media, again, we have this big issue where people seem to think that they're entitled to police via social media. Now, ultimately, a lot of people are going to say, what's he putting on social media for in the first place? I agree to a certain extent. This should have been, if it something he feels that strongly about, he should have taken this to an HR, should have taken this to the proper authorities if it's that much of an issue. Bringing up his old tweets, I get it. I understand why people have done that. And it's very easy to look at a tweet and say, oh, that thing was terrible. What he said was horrible. Therefore, he should be discredited. Absolutely, what he said was fucking atrocious. It really was. Some terrible tweets out there, really weird ones as well. His excuse for those he tweeted before his account was eventually privatized was that he was trying to be edgy. And when he was younger, he thought he was a bit of an edgelord and a bit cool. So what do you want me to say? I can't bury the individual and all of his accusations solely because he tweeted some awful things a few years ago. And the thing that people are burying the lead on, which frustrates me the most, is the fact that if he is indeed a terrible person or he has stalker-like tendencies towards wrestlers for whatever reason, then why in fuck's name was his social media not vetted properly? If AEW is indeed this incredibly professional company that everyone claims it to be with such a family environment, then you cannot tell me it would have been that difficult to go through his Twitter history, particularly with your money and resources available, and see the things that have been said. That's why it frustrates me a lot. And a lot of people are saying it's not about AEW. He's talking about Comeback Studios. It doesn't matter. They were working on behalf of AEW. However you want to spin it, the reality is AEW has been mentioned here. I don't know for a fact if it's true, but like I say, I find it highly suspicious that all of these individuals are not vetted. For instance, I am a graphic designer. I am also an incredibly honest and, shall we say, abrasive individual at the best of times. Now, if I get sourced to do work on behalf of a company for another company, perhaps, there is no question, and I would expect them to vet my social media. And frankly, if they did, chances are they probably wouldn't want to use me, which is fine. At the same time, it's really not that difficult. And if it was that easy for Joe Blogs to find said tweet using the N-word or whatever, you cannot honestly tell me that it would have been that much more difficult, if not far less difficult, for AEW as a huge professional company to deal with this. And I'm not going to sit here and bang on and make it an anti-AEW thing, because I don't hate AEW at all, and I don't have any, kind of bias or anger towards any kind of company. I just enjoy what I enjoy. However, AEW fans who are on Twitter saying, oh, well, it's clearly bullshit because he used the M-word once, or because he looks a bit suspect, or just look at the guy, he's clearly a bit off. These are all things that you claim you're above that WWE would do. And I can guarantee if the scenario had been on the flip side and this had occurred with a WWE employee, I guarantee people would have been far more sympathetic. If AEW haven't done anything wrong, fair enough. However, if this story is true, it does at the minimum warrant, regardless of whether you believe it to be true or not, it requires investigation. It does, and AEW fans burying their fucking heads in the sand and pretending it's not happening just because they're brand spanking new industry. I see people tweeting all the time. There are tweets right in front of me right here. There's one literally right here. I'm looking at, because the timeline, all you got to do is put the poor lad's name in to see it. And, when I say poor lad, people are going to be like, you sympathize with him. No, I do not. I don't give a shit, frankly. I'm covering it for the purposes of our podcast because we don't shy away from this bullshit. It's out there. It's been reported. Why shouldn't we discuss it? That's the whole idea of this medium. There's a tweet here that says, well, AEW has an incredibly famous environment for family. There's loads of people tweeting it. AEW is well regarded for its family environment. AEW treats its employees well, blah, blah, blah. These are all conjecture. None of you know that for a fact. None of you work backstage. I've seen people saying, I've reached out to Cody Rhodes and I'm awaiting a response. Good for you. Anyone can do that. You're not a fucking journalist. That's the other thing that annoys me. Somebody writes for a very low-level dirt sheet and wants to pretend that they're a journalist. We're not journalists. We're discussing this. Simply put, I expect people to treat this story with the same respect that it would be anything else. It's funny, isn't it, how we spent so much time during the speaking out movement almost viciously lambasting, and some would say rightfully so, anyone who dared question the victims. Well, this individual here is a victim, whether you like it or not, in this scenario, according to what he has said. And if people are like, yeah, but he used an N-word, so therefore he's lying, that's not necessarily true. I've done some pretty sketchy things in my youth, for instance, going out, getting drunk or whatever, throwing up behind an alleyway or something, or saying things that I wish I hadn't when I was emotionally charged or whatever. I've never claimed to be a wonderful human being. I've claimed to be an honest human being at the best of times. And I've always apologized in retrospect when I feel like I have not taken the correct amount of responsibility, because that's what adults do in this scenario. Seems to me like a lot of these AEW fans are so desperate to protect their brand that they're willing to compromise being adults. That's my biggest problem with it. Ultimately, I don't really have much else to say. I just hope that this actually gets treated with a certain degree of respect, because we are out here constantly, the same people on social media going, oh, these women, these are all victims. They should be believed, irregardless of whatever is being said. Okay, so why are we not affording that same treatment to this guy? Why? Because he's fat? Because he's got a neck beard? Because he looks a little bit stalkery? Because he looks like the kind of guy you might see taking up 2 seats at a wrestling event? Ultimately, it seems to me like people are profiling him and then using those tweets as a backup. That's not all right either. You have to have the same energy throughout. And it seems to me that, particularly on the AEW side of things, people are not using that same energy. Sorry, it just is what it is. Anything to add, mate?
No, just it's another one of those, like, it's almost like a double standard between men and women, and that's will always be a problem in wrestling. I mean, forever. I don't think that's ever going to go away because yeah, I think if a woman had brought up this story, people would just be believing her 100% immediately. But because it's just some guy, they're like, "Oh, but he stalked her and said the N-word once." It's like you said, he is a victim here, whether or not it's true, proven true or false. Right at this particular moment, he is the victim here. So he should be afforded that same level of dignity, that same level of innocent till proven guilty, because that's how the law works. Not on the internet, mind you, but in a court of law, that's just how the world works.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not really much else to add. I don't want to bang on about it forever. Like I say, I'll probably splice this for the YouTube accessibility and that. But ultimately, the biggest problem here lies in the fact that, again, I use it as an analogy, and it's not the best kind of analogy. If I went down a pub, right? If I went and saw some friends, got in an altercation with somebody, or for whatever reason used a racial slur or a homophobic slur, which is unacceptable, and I fully agree with that premise, and he should be held accountable for those tweets. Absolutely, he should, regardless of whether they're old or not. But if I do that, okay, and upset or rile up a crowd, and rightfully so, and then later that night I'm walking home and someone jumps out and, I don't know, tries to assault me, tries to attack me in some way, does that basically mean that that's not a crime, that that's justified because of my misdemeanor earlier? Not really. That's not how the world should work, and I'd like to think that people should be afforded the opportunity to apologize for their mistakes. And also, should there be a mistake, and obviously the same thing goes for AEW, he might have blown it out of proportion for all I know. Maybe he just got the wrong end of the stick, but ultimately it does, if nothing else, warrant investigation. And the reality is that just because AEW is your brand new shiny company, and don't come at me about, oh, well, you just hate AEW. Obviously not, because I went to see the first Dynamite and I watch this stuff regularly. And Pac is my favorite wrestler in the world, and I'll watch the show solely for him. But just because it's brand new and shiny and it's not run by Vince McMahon doesn't mean that all your favorite heroes on the black and white brand are not just a little bit suspect themselves. Bad people are everywhere. So you can bury your heads in the sand all you want, but ultimately not everything is sunshine and lollipops over there.